Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Alyeska Pipeline Service Company, fueling philanthropic programs and dedicated to creating educational and professional opportunities for Alaska Native people.
The National Weather Service.
Good Wednesday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 5th of October, and as always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. You can do that online at weather.gov/Alaska, or if you prefer to localize your information right away, you can do that from the Alaska page as well. But go to Fairbanks or /Juneau or /Anchorage, and you'll be able to see your area of Alaska a whole lot faster and information that might be a little bit more pertinent to what you're looking for. The Alaska Weather Information Line is always open, 800-472-0391, and if you haven't used that in a while, make sure you get a pencil or a pen and write down the numbers you're using. The next time you call, it'll go a little bit faster, and you won't have to wait for the voice prompts to guide you to 1315 if that's where you'd like to get information for. Just remember that number that you use. And if you have any questions about the Alaska Weather Information Line, the websites you're using, social media, or you just want to send us a picture from Ninilchik, let's say. You can do that anytime you want at nws.ar.tvweather@noaa.gov. We'd love to see your information and, of course, your reports. By the way, Katie out in Tok says it was 10 degrees this morning. Cold stuff. Cold stuff, Katie. Stay warm. Here's a look at the show times, and most of you know this already, but we want to remind you that on ARCS you can find our show still at 5:30. KUAC on 9.4 now, and UAF TV you can find us at 5:30. 360 North now, 7 days a week, 7:30, and Alaska Public Media, 5 o'clock in the morning. And on YouTube, you can usually get the show from our friends here at Alaska Public Media a little bit earlier in the evening. So if you like the online experience and can pipe that into your TV or just want to watch on your phone, scrub ahead to the parts you care about, you don't want to worry about the aviation stuff and you want to watch the Marines, you can do that very easily by just scrubbing along on the YouTube slider bar there if you haven't tried that yet. Again, that does require a cell phone or an internet connection, so an earlier option could be the 360 North. Which brings me to an important point next week. I believe that as we move into, well, 2 weeks from now, as we move into the AFN convention, we're going to see some time changes on 360 North. So if you are a viewer right now on 360 North, in about 2 weeks or so, the times are going to change. I believe it's Monday, Thursday, and Friday. But make sure you check your programming guide just in case, because you will see some changes during the AFN convention so that our friends at 360 North can bring you that very important gathering there from folks all around Alaska. So important stuff there. You'll still get your Alaska weather, but it'll be at a little different time during that week for about 2 or 3 nights. So make sure you check on that if the weather is important to you that week. And we know it always is, because when you look out west, you can see it is fall storm season. Look at this. We have high pressure across the Gulf. We have high pressure locking up most of mainland Alaska, and everything out west is blocked. It is holding in place. Now, the weather's on the move, but you could pretty much draw a line right there. All the stormy stuff's out across the Bering and the Aleutians, and all the nice October weather's over here from southeast, where it's not even liquid sunshine. It is sunshine. A few clouds today, but a pretty nice day in southeast and in south central and in the interior. And the North Slope has some low clouds, but the weather's not that bad. Then look out west. Here comes the next wave of low pressure. They're working across the Bering Sea, and a deep southerly flow, a strong flow, storm force winds and gusts today across the central Aleutians. And that has diminished now. We have widespread gale warnings out across most of the Bering Sea and a large part of the Aleutians and into the Alaska Peninsula. But as we go ahead in time, we're going to see that ease up a little bit more, and then we're going to return to another windier day there as we head toward Thursday and into Friday. And we'll do it again as we head into the weekend. There are several waves of low pressure lined up, but the big thing to note is here, if you're on the mainland if you're in southeast, if you're on the north slope, and really most of the west coast, you're not going to experience the really hefty winds that are coming in with these low pressure systems. Sure, the winds and the seas are going to come up a little bit more across the west, and they certainly are riding right over St. Paul and St. George and a large part of the Aleutians. St. Lawrence Island is going to be blustery, but if you're on the mainland, chances are conditions are going to be pretty nice. What you see is what you get for the next couple of days at least. So look at the weather pattern here. We have that line, that blocking area of high pressure, very stable weather here and pretty unsettled and normal fall stormy kind of weather out across the west. Impressive stuff. And once again, that weather pattern doesn't look like it'll change. Here we go to the maps, and high pressure at the surface is about 1,025 to 27 millibars there, all the way from the Northwest Territories across northern Yukon and into the northern interior and the North Slope. That does tend to lock down those low clouds in the coastal plain of northern Alaska. And then you can see the high pressure ridge extending out over the Gulf. That's keeping our friends in southeast fairly nice. And south central, it has been a pristine day. Southwest, you can see cooler weather there, but even with the southerly winds, we're getting in some milder conditions there across the YK Delta today. The stronger southerly winds start to shape up as you get out toward Adak and Atka. And again, today, some of those winds were up in the storm force level. Warmer air is lifting northward across the Bering, and even with that, most of the rain is really confined to areas around the Aleutians, the Pribilofs, and maybe a few areas of light rain out around Damonik and Eatolen Strait and into Norton Sound. But generally speaking, conditions have been pretty dry across the 49th. As we go into tonight, you can see there is an opportunity for wet weather, but it is not across the mainland. There may be some periods of light rain or snow falling out of those low clouds across the Beaufort Seacoast and the coastal plain. Places like Kaktovik and Prudhoe Bay may see a little bit of that. But high pressure is going to win the night and keep the sky pretty clear. And well, it's that time of the year with a clear, cold, dry sky. Conditions are going to cool off fairly quickly this evening as we're losing more and more of that daylight. Out across southeast, a few showers across the misty fjords and the southern inner channels there, but that's about it. You'll see a few clouds, not a whole lot of precipitations expected. And then we turn our attention out to the west. For the western areas of the YK Delta, you may experience some light rainfall and some breezy conditions, but by and large, the windiest weather will be across the eastern chain, Nikolsky, Unalaska and Dutch Harbor, and out toward the southern tip of the Alaska Peninsula, perhaps out toward Cape Sarajevo. Probably not really looking at a whole lot of that really deep, hard wind until you get a little bit further west. Now, as you get out across the northern sections of the Bering, St. Matthew Island, north of the Pribilofs, that's when some of those stronger, higher end of the gale warnings will be in effect. To the west of that is the center of low pressure. Behind that, we get into that north and westerly wind that is cooler and still wet as we head into tonight. By Thursday, the core of that low pressure system is moving north and west out into eastern sections of Russia, 975 millibars there. So it's weakening, it's moving away from Alaska, but we still have this corridor of faster moving winds and unsettled weather that's going to bring us the rain along with those stronger gusts. You can see how that impacts parts of the eastern chain and the extreme western part of the Alaska Peninsula. Notice also how a lot of this really isn't reaching western Alaska's coastline. It will be breezy. You'll probably see some clouds. You'll probably even see a passing shower, but the bulk of it remains offshore. High pressure still in charge, still winning the 49th state here, and out across the coastal plain to about the Brooks Range, you'll probably see some lower clouds. Not even a lot of precipitation out of that. For southeast, showers across the higher train, more clouds than anything else, but not even liquid sunshine once again. And then out to the west. Here comes the next weather maker there. That's the one we're going to watch carefully as we head into Friday. It is a stronger system. It is one that has tropical characteristics with it and a leftover typhoon. So as that continues moving northward into the Aleutians, it will deepen to about 953 millibars, and it will mainly impact parts of the central chain, the western Aleutians, and into the Bering Sea it goes. Our high pressure system is still here, and for many of us, that's might be a good thing there because that is going to keep this weather system out across the west and move it north and west back toward Russia. So we'll repeat the same situation that we're seeing right now. Higher chances of faster winds out across the eastern Bering Sea, probably not grazing much of the coastline. There's some variability in there, so we'll see if that changes as we get into tomorrow. For most of southeast, conditions look pretty nice. South central, southwest, a little bit breezy as you move out to the further west coast. And most of the interior and the Yukon Valley, as well as the North Slope, will be quiet as we head through the rest of the week. This will be something to watch, though, for the southern Bering Sea. So with all that, let's go on into temperatures. 40s and 50s for most of southeast today. The capital city, 53 degrees, 51 in Sitka, around Ketchikan and Annette. Temps there were in the lower 50s. Klawock and Craig also fairly mild today, 48 around Hyder and Stewart. Around Prince William Sound, low to mid 50s. Seward was 55. Homer was 55 degrees as well. If you're flying out to Kodiak tomorrow, 51 degrees there. 53 in Talkeetna. Healy was showing temps around 42 degrees this afternoon, only 39 in Fort Greely, 43 around the Queen City, 34 as you get up toward, it looks like Eagle, and 41 in Northway. So not all that bad as you get further and further north. 37 as you get to Fort Yukon. It was 34 going over AKwx Pass around 3 o'clock this afternoon. Mid-30s for the North Slope. 37 in Wainwright. Lower 40s for Kotzebue Sound. 45 in Shishmaref and in Nome today. Out around Tin City and Wells, 46 degrees. Around Gamble, 46 as well. Unalakleet showed 51 degrees with McGrath at 45. A little bit cooler up in Tanana today. Aniak was upper 40s, 55 in Bethel, 51 for Nunivak Island. And into Bristol Bay we go, lower to mid 50s there. Lake Iliamna was 51. The Alaska Peninsula all the way down from Cape Sarachev to Port Hyden, Sand Point, all in the mid 50s, 54 around Unalaska and Dutch Harbor, right at about 50 degrees for St. Paul and St. George, pretty close. And mid 50s for Adak and Atka, with Attu showing 48 degrees out there. Rain and wind was moving through. Now, overnight lows, as promised, under high pressure are going to cool off. We already heard from Katie and Tok that said it was 10 degrees this morning. No surprise there with that clear, dry, high pressure system, and probably will be cooler for Miss Katie out there. So bundle up and, I guess it's time to start thinking about plugging the cars in if you haven't already. Teens and 20s for many areas there around the middle Tanana Valley up to the upper parts of the Yukon. 16 degrees around Arctic Village. 20s and 30s for the North Slope. Kotzebue Sound in the lower 30s. Norton Sound in the 30s to about 41 in Nome. Upper 30s for a good part of Bristol Bay and the southwestern coastline. 45 for Nunivak Island. 40s and 50s for the Alaska Peninsula and mid 40s for the Aleutians. Close to about 40 degrees for northern parts of southeast, southern southeast in the mid 40s, south central at or above freezing, but only by a few degrees. High temperatures tomorrow, probably in the upper 30s for most of the Copper River Basin and the upper Tanana Valley and the upper Yukon Valley, close to freezing there for high temperatures now. Upper 20s around Arctic Village and AKwx Pass, just above freezing for the North Slope, closer to 40 for Kotzebue Sound, mid to upper 40s for Norton Sound, the YK Delta, right back into the lower to mid 50s. Why? A decent southerly flow keeps you mild. 53 around Sand Point, mid to upper 50s for Unalaska, Dutch Harbor, and Nikolsky, 53 in St. Paul, 51 in Attu, lower to mid 50s for southeast and south central, holding right around 50 degrees. Kodiak Island tomorrow, closer to the low to mid 50s throughout your Thursday. Flying weather, you'll probably see a little MVFR in the morning around the southern and eastern side of Kodiak Island. IFR, of course, wrapping into the storm front and that low pressure system out across the central Bering and the central and eastern Aleutians, as well as the North Slope. MVFR closer to the higher train and maybe a few spots in the inner channels tomorrow morning, but a lot of that goes away fairly quickly throughout the afternoon. Look for IFR conditions across the North Slope, mainly around Point Barrow and just east, and then IFR west of St. Matthew, the Pribilovs, down toward areas just west of Nikolsky but east of Atka. And again, conditions will follow that as we go through the rest of the week. AKwx Pass right now looks to be VFR through most of the day. Same goes for Addington Pass, so smooth sailing there and clear sailing as well. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass look to be A-OK for the most part tomorrow. Rainy Pass, we expect to see VFR conditions. Windy Pass looks to be pretty good for your Thursday. Isabel Pass also calling VFR at this point, so it looks pretty good there. Mentasta Pass, visual flight rules expected, and Tanita Pass we expect to see VFR. You catching a trend here? High and dry continues into Portage. VFR day there for you. And if you're going through Chilkoot and White Pass, again, watch out for some morning MVFR across the northern interchannels, but it looks like by the end of the day, things should be VFR. Freezing levels indicate that cold, dry, high-pressure system is also dropping the levels aloft to about 2,000 feet through a good chunk of the central and eastern interior, all the way down into the Panhandle. And then as you move westward, the results of low pressure working that warmer air northward blast the freezing levels above 4,000 feet for the Bering Strait, all the way down to the YK Delta and into the eastern Aleutians, as well as the Alaska Peninsula, to 8,000 to even 10,000 feet in some cases there. So warm in the west and cool and dry in the east. Icing potential is mainly along that boundary that we're finding across the Bering, anywhere from above 6,000 feet around the Gulf of Anadyr, all the way through the eastern Aleutians and the southern tip of the Alaska Peninsula. Everywhere else, it's pretty dry, so there's not a really big or widespread icing potential for most of the mainland or southeastern Alaska. So conditions are fairly okay there. So anyone flying from St. Matthew to the Pribilofs and southward, probably your greatest threat exists along that boundary. Now to the jet stream. If this doesn't tell the story, I really don't know what does today. We have a remarkably high amplitude jet stream in a blocking pattern. We've probably talked about blocking patterns before, but I like to relate it to a wall, or perhaps if you've got your favorite football player and he or she is a linebacker and just standing there, the big rough, tough kind of guy that you can't ever get through. That's what this is. This is a high amplitude blocking pattern, and if you draw a line and follow it along here like I have here with the jet stream, the wind speeds over 50 to even 100 knots or more, all the active weather is following this pattern and curving back into Russia. That's exactly what we're seeing with those stronger storms coming out of the North Pacific. High pressure is sitting tight right across the interior of Alaska, and we have some weaker systems on the south side of that. But the most important part of this weather pattern is this very sharp north to south contrast across the Bering Sea. That is guiding all the surface weather. Below that, we see similar conditions. At 9,000 feet, high pressures across the interior. That broad southerly flow picks up from 30 knots on the west coast to about 50 knots across the central Bering, including the Pribilofs, Nunivak Island, and the central and eastern chain. You can get a taste of some of the stronger winds with the next weather system there coming in just south of Attu. Winds are fairly light across southeast, 10 to 15 knots. They're wrapping around high pressure and feeding into low pressure south of Haida Gwaii. At 3,000 feet, that broad southeasterly flow again picks up just offshore of the west coast, 40 to 50 knots, in some cases almost 60 knots for St. Lawrence Island. Stronger winds again just starting to sneak into the weather picture here across the North Pacific as we look at 3,000 feet for Thursday, and 5 to 10 knots across southeastern Alaska. Fairly light and variable, in fact, across the interior. So turbulence, once again, will focus on the Aleutians, the Alaska Peninsula. St. Matthew probably has the best chance for isolated severe. The Pribilofs likely looking at occasional moderate below 4,000 feet, and below 3,000 feet the further north you go in the Bering. The next round of higher winds with wind shear and turbulence, of course, starting to work this way as we head toward Friday with that next weather maker. That's a look at your aviation forecast. I'll be back with the sea ice update and the rest of your marine weather here in just a few minutes. Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and we have a special guest in the studio today. We welcome Amanda Terborg of the Aviation Weather Center. Thanks for joining us, Amanda.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Amanda's flown in all the way from Kansas City, and for those of you that don't know, the Aviation Weather Center serves the lower 48 for aviators, just as the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit here in Anchorage serves all of Alaska. So I kind of wonder, what's the Aviation Weather Center in Kansas City doing to help out Alaska, Amanda?
Yeah, you know, we do a lot of collaboration work with our sister station up here. Lately, we've been doing a lot of work, especially in the satellite meteorology.
Okay.
In particular, we have been looking at ways to better identify icing conditions in clouds, which is a big deal up here because, as I'm coming to find out, even though I'm not from here, you guys have a lot of pilots here.
We have a lot of pilots. In fact, it's, when you say you can't get there from here, that's how you get there.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay, so with icing potential then, what's Kansas City working on?
Well, we are working on something that will help us, again, identify the icing in the clouds. You don't want ice on your aircraft. No. Not only does it add a whole bunch of extra weight to your airframe when it attaches to the wings and the nose cone, but it can also mess with your aerodynamics.
Right.
And in the most serious conditions, that can mess with it enough that you can actually crash.
It changes the shape of the wing, and that makes it sometimes impossible to fly, right?
It does, yeah. So we want to figure out a way to better forecast for that.
Makes sense.
Now this particular image is over Alaska. The colors here are a little goofy. It doesn't look like your run-of-the-mill satellite image.
Okay.
But the red is where you have liquid clouds and the blue is ice. But again, it really doesn't tell you a lot where you have icing conditions in that cloud. Because in those clouds there's little droplets, and they're cold, and they're actually below freezing, but they're still liquid, and that makes them sticky.
Okay.
So when an aircraft flies through there, those droplets are sticking to the aircraft, and it can happen amazingly fast.
Right.
And so that's what we're trying to find. And there is a product called the Aircraft Flight Icing Threat that does this. And it's basically looking at the temperature of the cloud, and it's also looking at the size of the droplets to identify a probability and intensity of those icing conditions.
Okay.
And if you flip to the next image, this is a case from Juneau, Alaska. where this probably wouldn't have been the best day to fly around Juneau.
Okay.
Now there was an area of moisture that pushed south from the southwest up along the coast that pushed in a stratus layer. And in the stratus layer, there was a lot of those supercooled liquid drops, or a lot of stickiness.
Okay.
And so the flight icing threat was able to, in the pinks and the reds there, was able to identify where that icing was. Now this is really cool. You know, it's really cool to be able to identify that. There is, you know, of course, caveats to every product. Much as we wish it would happen, sun doesn't shine all the time, unless, I guess, if you live in northern Alaska during the summertime.
Right, right.
But we need that sun to be able to bounce off those clouds and to be able to see where those supercooled drops are.
Okay, so it's a daytime only tool.
It is, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, right now, of course, you know, we're in the era of advanced satellite technology, and there is a satellite that can actually use moonlight to see clouds.
Yes.
And so sometime in the future, we hope to be able to do that.
Okay.
Another thing that is a bit of a challenge is multiple layers of clouds. You know, you can only see so far through a thick cloud.
Okay.
And if it's thick enough, sometimes you can't see a layer of icing that's below there.
Right, right.
But even besides those caveats, this product has a lot of potential to help out Alaskan aviators here.
Well, it sounds like a really big deal, and something that forecasters at the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit could use probably on a daily basis, and especially in the middle of a really big storm.
Yeah, I would think so.
Do you have a really good success story in the lower 48 using this tool?
You know, it's a fairly new product, and so we're still evaluating it. But yeah, we've had a lot of cases where we have seen that it does tend to capture those icing conditions.
Okay, very good. Well, Amanda, thanks so much for sharing some of the very interesting satellite imagery and the tools that you're using there at the Aviation Weather Center in Kansas City with us here in Alaska. People can probably find some of this information online, right?
Yeah, here is a website here. It's a page from NASA Langley, and they have this imagery as well as a bunch of other satellite imagery that you can take a look at.
Okay, great. And I'm sure our friends at the Alaska Aviation Weather Center and the unit will be using that in the coming months there with your training and your help there to learn more about that tool to help Alaska aviators any day of the year. That's wonderful stuff. So thanks again for joining us, Amanda, and we welcome you to view any of our Alaska weather facts on YouTube anytime at the address below, and we'll see you next time. On to your ice update now. Today's sea ice edge is growing. The general consensus is that a lot of this ice, smaller concentrations it may be, between about 20 and 80%, is slowly drifting to the west right now. But the ice edge is expanding as we're getting colder and colder air, of course. A lot of that is kind of coming and going in the middle of the night and then disappearing as we get into the heat of the day. But that heat of the day is shrinking, of course, so the ice will continue to expand as long as those colder nights are on the way. Looking at southeast, you can see northerlies working through the inner channels up to 25 knots in the Lynn Canal tomorrow. 25 knots with 5-foot seas expected there. Winds will diminish a little bit as you move further southward. A light easterly flow crossing the Clarence Strait. Otherwise, a north and easterly offshore flow for most of the outer coast, 20 knots or so, all the way from Yakutat down towards Sitka, where we find 10 knots and 3-foot seas, 4-foot seas outside of the Dixon entrance with that easterly wind. For Friday, look for a little bit more of a northwesterly shift up around Icy Cape and Cape Fairweather, 15 knots with a 3-foot sea. Northerlies working down the Lynn Canal and then continuing southward through the inner channels, anywhere from 15 to 30 knots with 3 to 6-foot seas. They're the highest in the north, of course, and south of Sitka. 15 knots on a northerly wind with a 4-foot sea on Friday. Across south central, the light and variable winds will continue inside of Prince William Sound. Not a bad day at all. 10 knots with a 2-foot sea, north and easterlies across the western Gulf. Easterly flow coming into the Barrens and Kodiak Island, 15 knots with a 3 to 5-foot sea. And northeasterlies all the way from Cook Inlet down into Shelikof Strait, 10 knots in the north and 20 knots down south in Shelikof with a 4-foot sea there. For Friday, winds remain fairly light and variable, 10 knots or so for most of Cook Inlet and west of the Barrens, 2 to 3-foot seas in that region with a light northeasterly wind at times south of Callaghan Island. A light and variable wind once again inside of Prince William Sound. Sounds like a good day to hit the water. West and northwesterly winds across the north and western Gulf. Southeasterlies pick up a little bit more coming into Kodiak Island at 20 knots with a 7-foot sea, and inside Shelikof Strait, 15 knots with a 3-foot sea. Inside Bristol Bay, southeasterlies start to pick up here, 25 knots with a 5-foot sea. Go down the coast a bit and they're up to 40 knots, a 9-foot sea there. 25 to 35 knots along the Pacific coast with seas as high as 15 feet around Sand Point and Cold Bay. For Friday, inside of Bristol Bay, winds come up even more, 30 knots with a 7-foot sea. Look for 30 to 35 knots elsewhere along the peninsula, with 12 to 16-foot seas for the Pacific coast and 9-foot seas down the Bering Sea coast on Friday. Here's where we start to get into some of the stronger winds. That core of the wind is still shifting eastward, so we can expect to see some higher gusts from Nikolsky to Unalaska tomorrow. 40 knots there with 13-foot seas in the Bering Sea side and the Pacific coast looking at 19-foot seas. We'll have 25 to 30 knots across the central chain, and then a west and northwesterly flow for areas from Adak all the way out toward Attu, 13 to 18-foot seas on that 30-knot wind. For Friday, once again, we're back into some stronger winds as the next weather system's moving northward. We'll get back into some stronger southerlies across the central Aleutians, 35 to as high as 50 knots with 21-foot seas there north of Atka and Adak, and then 35-foot seas south of the chain, again with higher gusts in the region. 35 to 40 knots expected on the eastern side, and out west, the winds turn northwesterly, 40 to 55 knots with 29-foot seas from Adak to Kiska, again with higher gusts expected. So again, watch the weather in the Aleutians. For the west coast, southeasterlies, 25 knots around the Kuskokwim Delta, but quickly moving up to 40 knots across the northern Bering and the Pribilofs. Anywhere from 15 to 20-foot seas expected in the region for Thursday. And as we get into Friday, you can see not a whole lot of change. A broad south and easterly flow, winds around 35 to 40, and seas holding from 12-foot seas around the Pribilofs to as high as 17-foot seas there for St. Lawrence and St. Matthew Island waters. For the North Slope, light winds in the eastern Beaufort, 5-foot seas there with 5-knot winds with a 1-foot sea, and easterlies working off the Chukchi coast with 3 to 6-foot seas there, 15 to 25. And for Friday, a stronger southeasterly wind picks up a little bit more. Still looking at small seas along the Beaufort and higher seas from 5 to 6 across the Chukchi. Let's recap your weather. Across mainland Alaska, high and dry, clear skies and cold weather tonight for many. Southeast, mainly dry. The active weather's out in the west with several waves of low pressure working into the Bering, the strongest of which coming our way on Friday. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather. See you tomorrow.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Support comes from the University of Alaska College Savings Plan, helping you and your child save for college every step of the way, from diapers to diploma. More information at uacollegesavings.com.